Hello, and welcome back to the Alexander Society. I'm your host, underground radical book reader Derek, joined by my friend and co-host, police informant Tim. How are we doing this lovely night, Tim?
Pretty good. Did not know I was going to be a police informant. Interesting.
Oh, we knew the whole time. Yeah, it doesn't end well for you. We knew the whole time.
Probably not. No.
Yeah, and then it won't end well for us either, but it won't end well for you first.
I mean, does anything ever end well for an informant?
No, not for the informants, not for the people they're informing on. It never ends well for anybody involved. Don't be a police informant. Stop being a rat, you pieces of shit. Fuck you.
Unless you're taking down mob offenders and you're actually going to witness protection.
Yeah, but that's usually other mob guys, so like they're kind of pieces of shit for their own, for other mob related reasons.
Yeah, still there's the few one-off people.
So how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. We just got done with our grand reopening at work today. Work went pretty well. Like wasn't involved in the reopenings part, but like our staffing was affected by that. But we were still really good on staffing. I think we had our best day all week today. Honestly, like just staying on task, productivity wise.
Oh yeah, that always feels good, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. How about you? Yeah. Wow. What the fuck? Where'd my brain go in there? Like my brain just stopped mid thought and I can't think. What about you, brother?
Yeah, I thought you were going. I thought you were going like a Letterkenny direction. Like, how you going, Big Shoots?
I've to this day have not watched Letterkenny.
You haven't watched that? Oh my god, dude. Okay, now we gotta watch together.
So after season 2 of Supernatural, that it's Letterkenny. At least a season.
I guess. Yeah, probably. For our audience, if you notice, if the vibes coming off of me are rancid, and I start to bring the whole aura down, I just want to let you know, it's because my barber fucked up my beard.
They destroyed my man's beard. It's pretty sad looking.
Very upset about it. I was not in a good mood today, for a variety of reasons, but mainly that. After I spent all that fucking time growing it back out. Jesus, oh god, I'm mad.
Yeah, you just lost what, like 5 months of growth? Almost 6? Depending on when your last cut in December was, about 5 to 6 months.
Yeah, about 5.5 months. Yeah, so I'm not happy about it. But we will go forth, and unfortunately we're going to be talking about a sad topic today, so that is not going to help.
So what you're saying is it's going to be sad boy hours this week?
Oh, it's going to be sad. It's going to be real like dudes rock there for a little bit, then it gets real sad real fast.
I mean, it can't be as bad as talking about Nazis.
Nazis do come up.
Fuck.
They don't play a big part. They just kind of pop up as a cameo right at the tail end, but they are there. But we're going to be talking about like the next worst thing, which is the Russian Revolution. We're going to circle back to that because we kind of skimmed over it. We're going to be doing a lot of skimming in this one too, but it's going to be mainly focused on the Russian Civil War for this one. And let me tell you, the Russian Civil War was real nasty. It was real brutal. It's the probably the best worst example of like revolutionary violence. Like just it. Yeah, you remember like us talking about like the Mexican Civil War and the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution and how
it was pretty fucking bloody from what I remember you talking about.
Yeah, it was nasty. It was like a lot of hatred, a lot of passionate hatred going around, made all the worse by just how fucking complicated all the politics involved were. So imagine that, and we're just gonna bump all that up to 11. So it's going to get pretty rough. But on the plus side, there is a glimmer of hope in it. Because we are talking about like a pretty cool guy, and a lot of the stuff he did, a lot of the stuff around him were like genuinely really good stuff. Like genuine, like a bit of like a better world glimmering through all of the blood and gore. So, Tim, what are you drinking tonight?
I am actually like, okay, so I mean this in the kindest way possible. I haven't found anything I've really liked from Cabin Boys. Like, I kind of enjoyed their Oktoberfest beers we tried, but like it wasn't like an enjoyed where like I'm gonna go back to that. But I went there because I was on my like grab from a couple local breweries, and I wanted to go to Solaria, so I also went to Cabin Boys because they're like in the same parking lot. And I was like, you know what? Recommend me a beer, and they were saying, here's a couple. It's like this ale, which was a Irish style red ale. I had red ales before. I knew I would like the red ale, so I got Cabin Boys Irish style red ale, which has a gorgeous rendition of Kilkenny's Irish pub here in Tulsa on it.
Oh, that's really cool.
I've notoriously not been a super hoppy fan of any beer that's like tastes like hops. That's like it kind of just tastes like a generic Coors or whatever, like a shit tier beer. The hops are there, you can taste it, but they're not offensive to me, which is really good. Like I'm actually enjoying this. This is the first like beer with hops in it that I've like truly liked. And then again, American Honey from the makers of Wild Turkey. I'm trying to find. I can't remember what the ABV is again because it's not. Oh, there it was at the bottom. It's 35.5. So, what about you, Derek? What are you drinking tonight?
So what am I drinking tonight? So I've got, a couple leftovers, a couple things that have been we have returning to the show. Anthem Brewing, Arjuna. I think that's Arjuna, whatever. Belgian, probably Arjuna. But it's Arjuna Belgian style white. It is 6%. It's just light. It's a light ale, and it's very pleasing. It's not special, but consistent, and I appreciate that. There's a quality to that.
Fair enough.
And then something that I really like. This is one of my comfort drinks since the first time I tried it.
I'm looking forward to finally getting to try this. The liquor you're talking about. Yeah.
What, the Bonnie Rose? Anyways, it's a Bonnie Rose Tennessee White whiskey, spiced apple. And the spiced apple is it's one of my comfort flavors. I love spiced apple. I love apple pie. I love it makes me feel good, and I need to pick me up. So
that reminds me of the one time, as a kid, I did not like apple pie, but I've grown to love it since then. My dad called me a commie for it.
A commie for, not liking?
Yes, for not liking apple pie.
Oh yeah, that is communist. Yeah, you are a communist for that. Communist, parentheses, derogatory.
Hey, I've started enjoying it since.
So yeah, you want to get into the rules real quick?
Yes, sir. I'll go ahead and start us off. First rule is every time property is expropriated, we take a sip.
Rule number 2, every time the Bolsheviks are real bastards, 3 sips.
And then every time we get sad, what, Derek?
We are going to take a shot. Speaking of shots, Prost.
Cheers.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite guys. Period. One of my favorite guys ever. I love this guy. As with all of our topics, not a flawless individual, but
I would say like most of our people are actually not flawless, but like by a long shot.
Yeah, this guy, God, he had a real hopeful vision for the future. He had a real hopeful vision for the future that really inspires me. And this guy was just he's been very influential in like the way that I view the world and the way that I understand. Just, my roles and kind of my responsibilities as a human being, like what it is that I feel like I need to do for like my fellow man.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So let's just hop right in. We're not. There's no preamble. I'm not going to do any preamble because we covered basically the broad strokes of this in our Georgy Zhukov episode. So we'll just hop right in at the very beginning.
Barrel right through.
Nestor Ivanovich Makhno was born a peasant on November 7th, 1888, in the town of Huyaipol. I always have trouble with the name of this town. I think it's pronounced Huyaipol, but it is one of those weird rural, like ancient medieval Ukrainian town names that just doesn't make any sense when you're trying to pronounce it. Like if you only know English, it is rough. But yeah, he was born November 7th, 1888, in the town of Huyaipol in what was at the time the Russian Empire and what is now eastern Ukraine. His parents, Ivan and Evdokia, had been born serfs. But they'd been liberated in the emancipation of 1861. They'd been able to get their get their freedom. So this was just about 20 years after. They were both probably teenagers, so they lived like the first bit of like their whole childhood as essentially slaves.
Okay. We went in last Alexander article a bit into that on the serfs and the freeing of the serfs and how controversial that was.
Yeah. At the time he was born, his family raised livestock on a small plot of land in order to make ends meet, and just to kind of help. They had a lot of kids. I think they had like 7 kids.
Well, more than I want to have.
If I remember correctly, I think all of them were sons too.
Jesus Christ.
Which is crazy.
Like, okay, so, like, I don't want to have kids, but it's in the way, like, I am not going to let it ruin a relationship. I don't know if I mentioned that to you or not. Like, if I'm with my partner and they decide they want kids, I'm not going to, like, let that end the relationship. I'm not just going to immediately decide, okay, because you want kids, we're going to have kids, though, either. It's going to be, like, something we sit and talk about and then make sure we're ready for it. But also, if I did, I definitely wouldn't want 7, and definitely not 7 sons.
Yeah, back then in this like just being a peasant, you have a lot of kids because your kids are your main workforce.
Yeah, like I'm not discounting that.
And yeah, like the more kids you have, the more crops you're able to bring in, the more odd jobs you're able to work, the more money you got coming into your family. It's simple economics. It's a matter of survival, and it makes sense. Infant mortality also crazy high. So like a good chance that if you have a lot of kids, not a lot of them will survive. That's just a fact of life that they have to do.
Yeah.
Your average person in this kind of environment is used to seeing dead kids. That's just a fact of life. So yeah, they had a small plot of land. They raised livestock, and his dad worked odd jobs for some of the. You know how I kind of talked about there are different types of peasants?
Yes.
Yeah, so in this town, there were the rich peasants and there were the poor peasants.
Well, of course there's always going to be class divide.
Yeah. Yeah, the being a peasant doesn't necessarily mean like you're subservient to anybody or that you're impoverished. A peasant just means you don't have a noble title. And so there were peasants who were wealthy landowners who were still peasants because they just didn't have a noble title. And because they were wealthy, especially after like the emancipation of the serfs, a lot of these guys who were able to get like a good plot of land for themselves, got really wealthy and kind of took over like their peasant towns. Like everybody in the town would end up having to kind of work for them in order to bring extra money into their houses, and so kind of de facto a lot of these like wealthier peasants became like the sort of the landlords of their towns. They were the businessmen, they were the elite, they had the political power, the economic power, and so often they end up becoming very abusive as a result, and everybody hates them. That's just how it shook out.
Yeah, like it's the it's kind of like that tradition of like the person who was bullied for way too long overcorrects when they finally have power and they start turning into a bully.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So Makhno's dad was, at the time of his birth, he was working as like a carriage driver for the big wealthy landlord in town. And according to the stories, he worked so hard to bring in extra money for his family that he just worked himself to death. That's the way that it's kind of presented. And so
Yikes.
Yeah, he ends up dying at when Nestor is 10 months old.
Oh, fuck. That's young.
Yeah. So he ends up getting raised by his mom along with his numerous brothers. As a kid, Nestor had a few opportunities that a lot of other peasant kids didn't have.
Okay.
For one, he was briefly, like, at one point his mom gave him away to one of these wealthier peasant families as like a foster kid to kind of be raised so that he would have like opportunities for like an education and stable food and a roof over his head consistently. And he lived there.
And that happened like more often than we like care to admit. Like, hey, I can't take care of this kid. We're gonna say they just disappeared and we give them to the local wealthy person.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Honestly, that still happens.
Well, yes, but like that's a little. I'm talking more like the hey, this kid died situation.
Yeah, I guess it is. It is harder to do that now because we have like the government got a lot better at like keeping tabs on people. But he lived there for about a year. But he hated being rich,
Respectable.
and he hated rich people. And so when he was 8, yeah, so when he was 8, he just ran away and he went back to his family. And when he showed up, his mom was like, "Oh my God, Nestor, what did you do?" So yeah, that he had that opportunity, but he hated the opportunity, and so he just gave it up because he just preferred being like a hardworking poor person. He'd rather be an honest poor person than rich, even from a young age.
I mean, yeah, I understand his view.
Yeah. So another opportunity that he had was his town was one of the few towns in his area that had a secular school, and so when he was 8, after he got back from his foster family, running away from his foster family, he ended up going to school. He started to learn some basic math. He learned how to read. He was a really good student. He was very intelligent. Did really well with schoolwork when he actually showed up, which was rare.
That's the key thing when they actually show up.
Yeah, he always kind of used it just as an excuse to, yeah, well, mom expects me to be at work, or mom expects me to be at school. I don't have to actually go to school. I'll just go out and play with my friends. That's kind of what he did. He still did show up often enough to learn how to read, though. So he did have that going for him. At age 10, he had to leave school because he had to work full time to support his family. 10.
He was blown off school before 10 and then stopped going at 10. Wow.
And this is when he always had a bit of, obviously, like up to this point, he always had a bit of a rebellious streak. When he gets into the workforce is when he starts to really, when his rebelliousness starts to turn into like a principled anti-authoritarianism. So picture this. As an actual child, he leaves his impoverished household to go do farm work for some rich asshole who treats him and all of the other workers like shit and pays even worse. After doing that all day, he comes home and he listens to his mom tell stories about her life as a serf before emancipation, all the abuses and the injustices that she suffered at the hands of her noble landlords, and he gets pissed off. He gets really, really pissed off.
Understandably so.
So, in 1902, when he's 14 years old, he sees a farm manager, the manager of the farm where he works, and the owner of the farm's son, 2 grown men, beating the shit out of a young boy who worked for them for some imagined slight. It's not clear what exactly the kid did, whether it was like he did something wrong with his work, or he didn't show the proper deference, or what exactly happened. But Makhno sees this happen, and he runs up to one of the older guys who he kind of works alongside in the stables, this guy named Ivan. And Ivan, upon hearing what's happening, runs up and attacks both of these men. Just starts throwing punches. Straight hands.
Just throw straight hands.
And once he starts throwing hands...
Is he throwing good hands?
He threw pretty good hands because he got... Both of these men got their shit kicked in. I'm not sure if it was him who did it or if it was all of the other people who joined in right after.
Oh, damn. Fuck yes. I love that.
Because once he gets started, everybody else sees what's happening, and they see their buddy Ivan beating up on the rich assholes, and they're like, hell yeah, let's go beat up on the rich assholes. And they start grabbing their pitchforks and their scythes, and all of a sudden you have a giant peasant rebellion on your hands.
I'm here for it. All here for it.
Yeah, all for it. And Makhno takes part. He grabs a pitchfork, and he helps out. They place the mansion under siege and force the owner to come out and first apologize to the boy.
I love this.
Second, give them all a pay raise. And then third, fire the manager. And once they do that...
This is the way.
Once he does that, all of his employees put down their weapons and get back to work. So he learns 2 things from this. One, property owners are pieces of shit. Two, when the workers all get together, then the boss loses all the power. And that's a lesson that's going to stick with him.
Something that we need to remember.
Yeah. For the rest of his teenage years, he kind of bounced from job to job, he couldn't be content with a job, because every job he got, he was working for somebody else. And he hated them. Every one of them. Even the nice ones, he fucking hated them, because he hated being under somebody else's thumb.
Understandable.
It got under his craw like crazy. I'm the same way. Even the job I'm in right now, I don't mind. I like it. I enjoy the people I work with. I even enjoy hanging out with my manager. Still fucking hate that I have to work for somebody else. It sucks. I hate it. I feel like shit because of it. It's not fun. So yeah, I get it. I understand. I sympathize. So yeah, he's just kind of doing this. He's just kind of bouncing from town to town, or from job to job, just kind of picking up a paycheck to make sure his family is taken care of wherever he can. And then 1905 hits, and we get the first Russian Revolution.
Okay.
And keep in mind, Russian Revolution happened in the cities. That's how revolutions work. They happen in the cities. And then whoever takes power spreads, what happens in the countryside happens in the countryside. A unique quality of the Russian Revolution was there was still a lot of, even though it mainly happened in the cities, there's still a lot of revolutionary politics going on in the countryside, which is very, very unique as far as revolutions go. At least up until like the 1910s and 20s, like we're about to get to. You saw a few more examples of that. But up to this point, revolutions were typically a city thing. But when this all started, a bunch of, socialist agitators started to come out of the woodworks, and a few of them even got around to his little town.
Okay.
And so this is how he learns about socialism. The socialists were organizing mass strikes across the country. The streets were filled with protests and riots. Revolutionary enthusiasm was spilling out to the countryside. One of the smaller players at the time, was the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, led by these two guys named Julius Martov and another guy whose name you may recognize, Vladimir Lenin.
Yeah, I've heard of Lenin.
Yeah. Makhno heard the Marxist pitch, and he was like, hell yeah, down with the bosses, down with the landlords, down with the czar, let's get some worker power in here. He was all on board. He didn't understand it very well, but he was like, he liked the cut of their jib.
He was here for it.
Yeah, so he's 15 at this point. He starts getting some, like, printed Marxist literature, like pamphlets and stuff, and he starts just kind of handing them out to everybody he comes across. He starts distributing literature. That's a classic Marxist thing. And he was really craving like more of this. He wanted to connect with more people that were like radical. He wanted to learn more about it. The town of Hulyapol did not have a lot of Marxists. They didn't have like any organized Marxist group. They did have one radical group though. That was a group called the Union of Poor Peasants. The Union was an underground reading circle that distributed and discussed radical socialist literature which had been banned by and outlawed by the Tsarist government. But they weren't Marxists. They were anarchists.
But of course.
Yep. After 6 months of deep reading and discussion circles, he was allowed to formally join the Union of Poor Peasants and became a completely convinced and pretty well-read and well-educated libertarian communist, anarcho-communist. So let's talk about the distinction here real quick. So you got your Marxists. Karl Marx proposed the idea that history is a progressive process of dialectical contradictions within society butting up against one another and eventually resolving, and that's how you get the progress of history. That's why things change throughout human society. You've got different forces within society that conflict with one another, and eventually the conflict has to be settled through a resolution, and that resolution is the next step in the progress of human history. And so Marx proposed, and Marxists believe that the main contradiction of the modern industrial society of industrial capitalism is the contradiction between the interests of the working class, the urban working class, the proletariat, and the property-owning bourgeoisie. And that eventually that contradiction has to be resolved, but the only way that it can be resolved is through proletarian uprising. And the uprising and the seizure of the means of production in order to organize a society around like a democratic industrial organization, basically. That's the concept behind Marxist socialism. The anarchists, on the other hand, a lot of them are still they have that kind of dialectical approach, but they also emphasize that like the main contradiction is not just between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, because even in an industrial society, you have a lot of areas where you don't have like a proletariat in conflict with a bourgeoisie. There's lots of different kinds of these conflicts, these class conflicts. The main conflict, which is a through line through all of them, is the conflict between the working class and the state.
Okay.
And so the anarchists in opposition to the Marxists believe that the ultimate resolution to these contradictions is not the neutralization of capital through proletarian revolution, but through the coordinated mass action of all oppressed people against the oppression of the state, and the eventual abolition of the state and its replacement with democratic voluntary institutions. So that's the basic difference, and Makhno, because he's exposed to the anarchists in this stage of his life, he falls on the anarchist side of that coin.
Gotcha.
It's fully possible in a different timeline he could have been a Bolshevik, but that was not our timeline. So, in the aftermath of the revolution of 1905, the very, very liberal Duma, which the representative parliament, which had been instituted in the aftermath of 1905, they started to pass a bunch of land reforms, because, that was a big issue in Russia at the time. But, the liberal idea of land reform is not maximize the ability for the peasant classes to be able to sustain themselves off of the land that they work. Their priority was privatize everything, cut it out with all these common land, like the common land, these common land holdings that these peasants kind of work. Scrap all of that, cut it all up, divide it, and give individual plots to individual farmers to farm by themselves to make a profit for themselves. And what ends up happening as a result is that all of these different plots of land that get cut up, some of them are not very good for farming.
Well, of course, you're going to have you're going to split everything up. Eventually, there's going to be some bad land that gets put to people.
Yeah, and so if a farmer's not able to make it with their plot of land, then eventually they'll be forced to sell the plot of land, and the people that could buy the plot of land are the rich peasants. And so the rich peasants, the shitty asshole landlords that Nestor Makhno hated so much, are starting to get way more powerful, way more rich, way more influential, and as a result, way more abusive. And that is a problem.
Obviously.
So in response, the Union of Poor Peasants decided to transform from just, an illicit reading circle into a full-fledged revolutionary cell. Mainly what they did, they really liked robbing rich people. That was their main thing. They'd find a rich person, he's sitting on their porch, walking down the street, hold a gun to them, demand all their money, take their money, and take it back home with them. And then once they got home, they would put that money into a printing press, which would print out a bunch of propaganda for them. And then, so they'd be using this money to then print out a bunch of propaganda and start handing it out. That was their basic idea at this time. Pretty typical revolutionary idea at the time. In hindsight, we know for a fact this is not an effective way to actually create revolution. Might be a good way to, spread ideas around a little bit, but actual revolution, it's not going to accomplish much. But that's what they had. That's what they were doing. It's not really known how much Makhno was involved in this because, for one thing, it's a secret underground criminal organization. They're not going to talk or leave records. For another thing, it's rural Ukraine in the 1910s, or the 1900s. They're not going to keep records of stuff.
No.
They're not going to have the ability to keep records of stuff. So we're not even sure who exactly all was involved in this organization. There are some people in here. We have like a last name.
And that's it.
And that's it. We don't know anything else about them. And we have a last name and that they were later on hanged by the Tsarist government for one reason or another. So we don't know exactly how much Makhno was involved in this, but based on his personality and a lot of the stuff he'll do later, I'm going to guess probably pretty heavily involved. So, Makhno was arrested for the first time in his life in 1907, when another member of the Union of Poor Peasants, this fucking asshole named Nazary Zhukov, was arrested and ratted on the entire cell.
Ah, he's a rat.
He's a rat. It's possible he was tortured. It's possible he immediately gave them up.
Even then, the most you're supposed to give up is like one or two people to get them to leave you alone. You're not supposed to rat on everyone.
No, you make up names to get them to... You give them false information.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, if you're going to actually rat, you don't rat out everyone is what I was trying to make a point of.
Yeah. Well, later on, he's going to join, like when the 1917 revolution really kicks off, he's going to go and join Makhno's movement. And then later on, when Makhno starts to lose, he's going to defect to the Bolsheviks and lead a committee in the Bolshevik Party called the Committee for Anti-Makhnovist Activity.
Well, okay.
Yeah, so I have a feeling that he probably would have ratted even if he wasn't tortured. If he was tortured, which we...
Yeah, it sounds like something like he's going to be a rat no matter what.
He was just born to be a rat. Fucking asshole. So, Makhno would end up, because he's still like a teenager. He's not even 18 yet. He ends up getting let go due to lack of evidence. He gets arrested, but then he's let go due to lack of evidence. But the group itself was outlawed, and so after that, Makhno kind of just started hopping from village to village, kind of building new anarchist reading groups, quote-unquote reading groups, with the intention of eventually making them like revolutionary cells. And then later on in 1909, while he's kind of out doing this stuff, some of his comrades, unbeknownst to him, discover a police informant within the Union and put a bullet in the back of his head and dump him in a ditch. And when this happens, the group is immediately rounded up by police, including any known former members, including Makhno.
Damn.
Yeah. So he's arrested in 1909. In 1910, him and several other members of the Union are found guilty of revolutionary conspiracy and are sentenced to be hanged. And that's it. That's the episode.
Don't give me that horse shit. That's not the whole episode.
Yeah, no. His Makhno's sentence is commuted to a life sentence of hard labor. Quote unquote, commuted.
Sure, that's a commutation.
Yeah, and the reason that they cite for his commutation to a lifetime of hard labor is his age. He's too young to be hanged.
Oh, so he got the you get out of jail free because you're a baby card.
Well, no, he's still going to be in jail. Like, he's going to be one of the worst.
I don't mean literally. You're not going to, like, die.
Yeah, he's not going to die.
Or whatever. He got the commutation because he's a baby.
He's not going to die of strangulation. He'll die of overwork and starvation instead. There's the big thing. So yeah, he's moved around from prison to prison for a little bit until he eventually ends up in Butyrka in Moscow. Butyrka prison is basically the prison where the Tsarist government keeps all of their political prisoners. And there's 3,000 prisoners in this prison. They're really...
Fucking hell.
Yeah, they're really packed in like sardines. While he's there, he ends up connecting with other anarchists from all over Russia. So, including one like really seasoned revolutionary by the name of Peter Arshinov. And Arshinov would kind of take Makhno under his wing as kind of his, revolutionary protege, if you will. And he starts to teach him all of these magical things. Like, he introduces him to a lot of, like, a lot of foreign anarchist writers like Errico Malatesta and who else? There were some other ones. I can't remember off the top of my head. Most of the prominent anarchist writers at this time were Russian, so
Basically, a lot of people I've never heard of because I'm not too well versed on the literature and such.
yeah, like I could talk to you all day about Buenaventura Durruti. You're not going to get any of it at the end. The most prominent writer that he's kind of exposed to, and I need to emphasize, they are in a prison for political prisoners, and they're still able to get a lot of this literature in.
That's kind of awesome, though.
Yeah, that's kind of great. So the one writer that really the pieces of work that really stick with him are the stuff by I've mentioned him. I mentioned him in the last episode. Peter Kropotkin.
I vaguely recognize the name, but I don't have enough context.
He's kind of credited as the guy who formulated the concept of anarcho-communism. Like, before then, anarchism had existed, communism had existed. Kropotkin's kind of the guy that put the two together. And he also wrote a whole bunch of, really, really good, not just good anarchist theory, but just good political theory, period.
Nice.
His book, The Conquest of Bread, it has a very obvious anarchist slant, but on its own, it's a really good analysis of how revolutions fail. And he kind of just breaks down, he mainly focuses on the French Revolution, but he does a really good job of just breaking down, what they were trying to accomplish, what they had in mind, and why they failed at it.
That's kind of dope, being able to analyze that stuff. Be like, hey, here's where we need to improve if we want to fix shit.
Yeah, although his conclusion, the main thesis of the book that he kind of comes to is really funny because it seems kind of obvious on its face. His conclusion is if you want to take over the government and replace it with something new that you think is better, the thing that you replace it with has to actually take care of people.
No shit.
Because if you don't do that, then you lose the people, and without the people, it's a revolution. If the people aren't on your side, they're going to overthrow you. That's how a revolution works. And that was the basic thrust. That was the Conquest of Bread. The one that really stuck with Makhno that he really liked is actually probably the work of political theory that has stuck with me as well the most. It is Mutual Aid, A Factor in Evolution, which is it's a really interesting book because it's not just theory. It's not just political theory. Half of the book is biology.
Interesting.
It's basically just Kropotkin going through because Kropotkin, when he wasn't doing anarchist stuff, his first main profession that he was really passionate about was he was a scientist. He was a biologist.
Okay.
And he liked to travel around the world and watch species and watch animals do stuff. And the more he watched animals do stuff, the more he kind of realized, they're really working together to do a lot of stuff. Even between species, there's a lot of very cooperative relationships between a lot of these different species and within these species as well. And he kind of got to thinking of it. He read he kind of based a lot of it on the works of Darwin, but he kind of expanded on Darwin and basically saying that competition for resources is not the only pressure that promotes the evolution of a species. It's not the only thing that kind of creates the conditions for the gradual change.
It's not the only thing that propels us forward.
Yeah, it's but not necessarily propel us forward, but from a biological evolutionary standpoint, the development of species is not solely reliant on competition for resources, but also in what best adapts them to be able to cooperate with one another, because a community is better able to defend the interests of each individual within the community better than an individual on their own is. And so the first half of the book is just biology, it's just discussing that, and then the second half is now how do we take these lessons and apply them to political theory?
Interesting. I would have never thought to do that.
It's fucking genius. It's genuinely one of the most, because you read it and you're this makes so much sense that it feels like it should be obvious on its face, but I never thought of it this way before.
I mean, how many times has that been the case for a lot of different things throughout history, Derek?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he Makhno fucking loved mutual aid, and he had a copy of it that he carried in his pocket for the rest of his life. He read that book dozens of times. So while he's also in prison, he gets to know a few Ukrainian nationalists in prison. Some of these guys that are kind of advocating for like Ukrainian sovereignty from the Russian Empire. He kind of hears them out for a little bit because he's an open-minded guy. He hears what they have to say, and then right after he hears what they have to say, he starts getting news in about the start of World War One.
Yeah.
And he starts learning. He reads the newspapers and starts learning about like the geopolitics around the start of the Great War. And he realizes, oh, nationalism is horseshit. Nationalism is fucking stupid. This is what nationalism gets us.
It's always been stupid.
Yeah, and so he completely rejects nationalism outright, and never entertains it again. He entertains allying with nationalists on a few different occasions, just based on convenience, but he remains committed to the nationalism is a bad idea and it causes bad things to happen. No national borders. Get rid of all of it. It's stupid. Don't worry about it. He would remain in prison in this horrible... Keep in mind, he's working 10-hour days.
What age was he arrested at again?
Let's see. That would have been 1909. So he was 21.
Fuck.
20 or 21. Yeah. He spends 8 years in prison.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Which is, pretty good for a life sentence.
Yeah?
Because he gets out after... He doesn't die. He gets out after 8 years. And the reason he gets out is because 1917 happens.
What happens in 1917?
February 1917, we get the February Revolution and the Tsar is overthrown.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the Tsar is overthrown, the Duma asserts itself, takes control of the state, and all of the political prisoners are set free, including him. He does not get out of it unscathed, though. He got tuberculosis while he was in prison, and it would plague him on and off for the rest of his life. And it would eventually kill him.
As it did a lot of people, to be honest.
Oh yeah, it was bad. Makhno was freed, and at the age of 28, he is able to return home to the town of Hulyaipo. He was naturally, overjoyed to see his friends and family again, but pretty quickly began butting heads with his old comrades in the Union of Poor Peasants, because while he was in prison, he got exposed to a lot of new ideas, kind of came to some conclusions that the rest of them didn't really agree with.
They wasn't ready for this?
Yeah.
It's like that one scene from Back to the Future. You may not be ready, but your kids are going to love this.
Yeah. Well, he didn't even have to wait for the kids, because basically after getting into these arguments, he's like, well, okay, if you don't agree with me, then I'll just go do this myself. Because basically their disagreement was the Union of Poor Peasants wanted to be terrorists. They wanted to do...
Oof. Yeah.
Wanted to do propaganda by the deed in order to spread revolutionary fervor and kind of just raise the temperature of society until it boiled over. That's the concept. It's kind of accelerationism. That's a basic concept. Makhno was like, hell no, that's counterproductive, because that just brings the authorities on our ass. What we need to do instead is create a mass movement. We need to get out there, get down in the mud with the people, teach them about anarchism and socialism, teach them how to properly organize a revolutionary movement, organized to be able to defend themselves and their interests, and then get them all together, get them organized, and sick them on the state. And that's what he does.
Smart.
Yep. So he leaves the Union behind, and he just goes out into the countryside and starts recruiting people all around Hulyaipola. He just talks to people. And eventually, he starts off by organizing unions. So the first thing he does, he organizes a big old union for all of the peasants. So that whenever they get into a dispute or a conflict with their landlord, they can just go on strike. Nice and easy. They already have the infrastructure there. They already have the organization. Happens pretty quickly. Then after that, he goes to all the carpenters. and all the metal workers. And he gets all of like the urban workers together and puts them in their union. They form an industrial union. And they do the same thing. Anytime one of these rich capitalist businessmen in the cities, in the city, starts to get a little squirrely with paychecks or something, they could just go on strike. Immediately go on strike, get it knocked out, bish bash bosh, they're done. And people fucking love Makhno for this. People love him so. And I really need to emphasize, he does all this in a matter of months.
Fucking hell?
It's like 2 months. And he has basically the entire working and peasant class of this town of several thousand people just organized. And they become so organized that within a couple months, they effectively control all of the industry and the entire economy of their area. And then some local elections are held for like the local city, basically like the provisional city council that kind of reports to the Duma, the provisional government, revolutionary government. And they are so well organized that they vote as an entire bloc and get all anarchist candidates into...
Wow. That's awesome.
Into positions of power. And so the government effectively just becomes a commune.
That is awesome. That's fucking dope.
Yeah. And then when the local government is completely controlled by anarchists, when they start to go on strike, they're not just demanding higher wages or shorter hours or better working conditions. They're now demanding the shop or the farm.
Yeah.
They're like, we are going to stop working, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we're not going to start working again until you leave. This is ours now. You can't have it. And it works. And this is when the expropriations start.
I was about to say, we're about to have some sips. I can feel it.
Yeah, this is our first expropriations. Keep in mind, Hoyapol is a relatively big place. He's got most everybody organized, but it's going to take a while to kind of go through this process of like seizing and collectivizing all of these shops and all of this farmland. It's going to take a while. So just keep in mind this is going to be an ongoing process through most of the story. So in October of 1917, the workers' councils in Petrograd, which are controlled by the Bolsheviks, they launch a coup, which overthrows the Duma. This is called the October Revolution.
Gotcha.
And this is how the Bolsheviks and Vladimir Lenin gained control of the Russian state. In response to this, realizing that, oh boy, this revolution is about to enter we're about to live through some very interesting times.
So, like every American when they saw Trump elected for the second time?
Yes. Yeah, we are living through... And
every American with a brain?
To be completely frank, we should probably react the same way, because what he does is he organizes what he calls the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. These also come to be known as the Black Guards. This is a peasant militia, and their basic job is, one, if any outside force comes around to Holyapol and tries to get squirrely with their, attempt to create an anarchist society, then they can shoot them. Simple. Second goal is...
so instead of shun the non-believer, it's shoot the non-believer.
Shoot the non-believer, yes. The second goal is to, a big group of organized men with guns, pretty good motivator for some of those holdout landlords and business owners who hadn't quite handed over their property yet. Show up, workers go on strike, boss goes out to see what the commotion is, he sees a big group of guys with guns. Pretty easy choice to make from that point going forward.
If that doesn't convince you to turn over shit, I don't know what will. Yeah,
so that is probably the main purpose of the Black Guards at this point is just to, facilitate the expedient expropriation of property. So, during this time that he's kind of, Holyapol is becoming an anarchist commune, Ukrainian nationalists are growing in power and influence in these, Ukrainian regional committees. Like in the province that Huyapol is in, the anarchists are supreme. Everywhere else in Ukraine, it's kind of split between the Bolsheviks and the nationalists, and the nationalists are kind of starting to win out. And so eventually they start butting heads with the Bolsheviks, and then the Bolsheviks start butting back, and then they pull guns out, and it eventually devolves into an all-out war.
Yeah, it usually devolves.
So Makhno, believing in the revolution at this point, he sees in the Bolsheviks, not what he would eventually see them as, but at this point they're kind of misguided fellow travelers. They are comrades in the revolution, even if they need their education needs a bit of tinkering.
Just misguided on the way, and we can get them back on track.
Yeah, we've got reactionaries that we need to deal with. Let's take care of those first, then we'll work on getting these Bolsheviks on the same page as us later on. This was the right move, because in this situation the anarchists are pretty outnumbered in their area, and he needed allies, and the Bolsheviks were a pretty strong ally. It would not work out in the long run.
I mean, very rarely does it.
For now, though, Makhno directed the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution to team up with the Red Guards, the Bolshevik militias, and team up with them and drive out the nationalists. And so they are successfully able to drive the nationalists out of their region of Russia, a region called Alexandrovsk, which is kind of like southeastern Ukraine, right next to the coast of the Black Sea. The Bolsheviks and the anarchists organized a Soviet in the process, which is a workers' council. And the two factions are, at this point, they kind of hold joint power over the area. And this is the most peaceful that the anarchists and the Bolsheviks are ever going to be. And it would not last long, because the nationalists consolidated power in western Ukraine and formed what came to be called the Ukrainian People's Republic. And this republic invited, keep in mind, this World War I is still on at this point, the German Empire and Austria-Hungary invited their troops in basically to occupy Ukraine in order to prop up the nationalist government. And, these giant armies with, battle-hardened seasoned troops after 3 years of the Eastern Front of World War I, they sweep through. It's no contest. They occupy the entire country. Makhno and his immediate followers are forced to flee into exile into Russia proper. And he's not happy about this for some reason. So, while he's in exile, Makhno started working alongside the Bolshevik Red Guards in order to kind of help him kind of get around southern Russia. He kind of went on a speaking tour, basically, just traveling all around southern Russia, kind of both getting the temperature of the Russian people in regards to where they're at with the revolution, and also seeing what the Bolsheviks are up to, how they're kind of running the areas that they control. This is a pretty nasty, this is the start of the Russian Civil War. The Duma has fled out to the countryside, and they're teaming up with a bunch of reactionaries and monarchists and, proto-fascists, and forming what comes to be called the White Armies. So, you got the Red Army, you got the White Army, and the White Army has a whole bunch of different armies. You get the Volunteer Army, you get the Russian National Army. It's a few different kinds. So they're kind of traveling all around, kind of using. He's kind of getting the Red Guard to help him fight off White Army raids. They're trying to capture him. So he's just kind of traveling around and to Bolshevik controlled areas and kind of going on a speaking tour, gathering popular support for a pushback into Ukraine. He does not like what he sees from the Bolsheviks. He does not like the way that they're running revolutionary Russia. Most prominently, he witnesses members of the Cheka, which is the Bolshevik secret police.
Okay. Are they starting to do some horrible shit?
He witnesses them. Remember, this is right after this is a few months after the October Revolution. He witnesses a couple agents of the Cheka arrest revolutionaries, fellow socialists. They weren't Bolsheviks, but they were fellow socialists. Arrested them because they would not follow the Cheka agents' orders. Arrested them, put them on a show trial, and within 24 hours, both of them were shot.
Wow, that's 3 sips.
Yeah, fuck yeah. So, he's kind of realizing, these Bolsheviks may not be on the up and up. Maybe Lenin and me have different definitions of what workers' control means. And so his trip finally took him all the way to Moscow, where the first thing he does is he introduces himself to the local Russian anarchists, and he gets to meet his idol, Peter Kropotkin. And they get to sit down and have a chat about like what's going on in Ukraine and like what he's planning on doing once he gets back to Ukraine and all this fun stuff. And, when he's first getting into the conversation, he's kind of starstruck. And then when he's coming out of the conversation, he's like, he's a nice guy. He's wrong about a few things, though. Which is, this was a very Makhno thing to do. He was very sure of himself. That was his main personality trait, was he was confident beyond imagining. And it made him very charming.
Sometimes I wish I had that confidence.
Yeah, it made him very charming, and it made him very good at talking to people, because people really picked up on his energy. It also made him crazy fucking arrogant. He was very arrogant, very brash, very aggressive. One of his favorite pastimes was getting drunk and getting into fights. Because he was convinced he'd win every one of them. To be fair, he did win most of them, but he was so sure of himself that sometimes it kind of got in the way. Not often, though. He was still very smart, and he knew how to look at things objectively, but it still caused problems, and we'll get into a few of them. So while he was in Moscow, he was also this really chafed him, because he didn't like being summoned, but he was summoned to a discussion with Vladimir Lenin, because Lenin thought that Makhno's anarchism was, in his own words, quote-unquote, poisoning the peasantry.
Well, of course, because he wants a different goal than Makhno, and Makhno's popular.
Yeah, and Lenin and Makhno really do have different visions of the worlds that they want to create. And Makhno hasn't really kind of wrapped his head around that fact yet. So he goes into this conversation very appeasing, he wanted to bring up a lot of the stuff that he saw the Bolsheviks doing with Lenin. But he quickly realized over the course of this discussion, Lenin is not interested in hearing dissent. He's not interested in hearing something that will
be contrary to his belief.
Yeah, make him sound like an accusation that he might be doing something wrong. And so Lenin basically sits him down and questions him, why did your anarchists do this? Why did your anarchists do that? Why didn't your anarchists do this and that? And most importantly, why aren't they towing the line? And Makhno listens to this all very patiently, quietly seething at all the criticism he's getting. He's very arrogant. He's got a bit of a temper. Doesn't like being criticized, but he keeps his cool. And once Lenin is done with his questions, he goes into this long speech about exactly what the conditions are in Ukraine, why things have happened the way that they have, and what exactly it is his anarchists have been doing. He explains the organization of the local Soviets. He explains how they've led a campaign of expropriation, how they effectively organized a militia army, but an army nonetheless. And he ended his argument basically by saying, say what you will about us anarchists, but it was the peasants who were on the front lines fighting the nationalists while all of your Red Guards were sitting on their asses protecting railroads.
Damn!
Yeah, that's how he ended this off. They shake hands, Makhno leaves. Makhno is convinced he's about to get some Cheka agents after him trying to kill him. Not yet, but eventually. But at this point, Lenin basically goes to his assistants and he's basically like, I like this guy. I might have misjudged him. I might have misjudged what's going on in Ukraine. I think we can trust this guy. We need to watch out for him, but I think for now we can trust this guy. So Lenin decides to give him a little bit of help, and they formulate a plan in order to sneak Makhno back into Ukraine. And so Lenin helps get him some forged IDs. Makhno gets his hands on a captured Ukrainian army officer's uniform, and he sets back off with his comrades to return to Ukraine and free them from foreign oppression. So Makhno crosses the border. He's disguised as a Ukrainian People's Republic officer, and it takes him a few weeks because he has to constantly be hiding to keep from being recognized or being captured, just to keep his cover. But eventually he does make it back to Huyapol. By the time he's returned to Ukraine, the Ukrainian People's Republic government has been overthrown by German and Austrian forces. And basically, Germany was just like, we don't need nationalists here. We'll get rid of you. We'll put our own guy in charge. It'll be easier for everybody.
Well, of course.
And so they overthrow the nationalist government. They institute a puppet government, which kind of retroactively gets referred to as the hetmanate, because it's ruled by a guy called a hetman, which is an old Ukrainian political term and not important. And with the hetman in power, or as a puppet, these German and Austrian forces are just going across the entire country, just cracking down on any revolutionary dissent they can find.
Because why not?
Yeah, if there's even a whiff that they could be associated with the with any revolutionary socialist faction or nationalist faction, you get arrested, you get tortured. If they decide they found something, you get shot. Just end of. So when Makhno gets back to Huyapol, he discovers that one of his brothers has been arrested and tortured by German troops, and another one of his brothers, who had been fighting in the First World War, and was wounded and was crippled. This crippled man was arrested by German troops, tortured, and then shot.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And also the house he had grown up in, where his mom still lived, was burned to the ground.
God damn.
Yeah. Yeah. His mom was fine. She didn't get hurt, but
still sounds like a metaphorical kick to the nards.
Yeah, he was not happy. So he gets to work. The first thing he does, he starts organizing local peasants into an underground resistance, because that's what he's good at. He can talk to peasants. He's one of the peasants, so he goes to the peasants. He talks to them. He's like, yeah, it's time to kick these motherfuckers out. And so he organizes like underground resistance cells, starts distributing firearms. The way that he kind of like hops back and forth between towns without getting caught, without getting recognized, he disguises himself as a woman.
He cross dresses.
Yeah. He puts on like a real thick, long dress to hide his form, and he puts on like a traditional one of those like head wraps that like babushkas wear.
Okay.
And he's still pretty young at this point. He hasn't grown out any of his facial hair, so if for somebody who's a little nearsighted, he does look like just kind of an ugly woman. So he does have like some slightly feminine features. Very smooth face. If you look at a picture of him, even when he's like close to death, like when he's later on in his life, very smooth face, not a wrinkle on it.
Interesting.
Yeah, really, I don't know if that was just an effect of the cameras at the time, if it was like edited or what, but just always looked a lot younger than he actually was. Like the pictures that were taken of him at this period of time when he was like in his 20s, he looks like he's 13.
Oof.
So yeah, he starts organizing the local peasants into like resistance cells, starts handing out weapons, and starts sending them off. Starts giving orders and directions to go off. He gives them some rules of engagement before he sends them off to start attacking targets. Because this is really important to him, not just for... I don't think he really necessarily cared about the moral reasons. He might have. I'm just not really sure. But just purely practical reasons. First, the point of these attacks was to destroy infrastructure. No wanton violence for the sake of violence. The only targets that they would attack are enemy military targets and landlords, because they're the enemy. Anybody else is off limits. You don't attack them. The second, no terrorism, so no killing civilians.
Basically, only as much violence as necessary to the necessary people.
Right, because in his mind, the point is not violence. We're not doing violence for the sake of like turning up the temperature for like revolutionary like fervor. We're not trying to cause a terror here. What we're trying to do is get the enemy out so we can build the society that we want to build. And that's it. The third rule, and I really do want to kind of linger on this for just a second. The third rule was anybody, friendly or enemy, that gets caught conducting a pogrom or any sort of anti-Semitic violence is to be shot on sight.
Fuck yes.
Fuck yes. And I really need to emphasize, do you know how fucking rare?
I'm drinking to that.
Absolutely. You really need to understand, there was no other military force in the entire Russian Civil War that had a specific rule in their conduct, like their rules of engagement, that said,
hey, don't be a shithead anti-Semitic person.
Yeah, don't be an anti-Semite. Anti-Semites are the enemy. They explicitly just came out and said it. No other, even the Red Army, who had, Jews in prominent positions of power and command within the Red Army and within the Bolshevik Party, still did not have like a specific rule against conducting pogroms or just attacking Jews for no reason. And it happened all the time. Of course, the White Army was way worse about it because for them, anti-Semitism was a central part of their ideology, whereas for like the Red Army, it was just an incidental fact that a lot of the people that they ended up conscripting happened to be anti-Semitic. So there was a discrepancy there, but it still had, the Red Army did a lot of anti-Jewish violence. The Black Army, a few people within the Black Army did do anti-Jewish violence. They did attack Jews, they did do pogroms. And Makhno personally had them shot.
Man stood on business.
Man stood on if nothing, and the reason I wanted to linger on this is because both later on in his life, near the end of his life, and to this day, one of the main criticisms against him was that he was a pogromist.
That's the biggest...
That he was an anti...
The fuck?
Yeah, there are two sources which claim that he did anti-Semitic violence. Three sources. One is Soviet historiographers in the years immediately after the Russian Civil War. So, basically right after Stalin came to power, a bunch of like Stalinist hardliners started writing histories of the Russian Civil War, and when they got to Makhno, they just threw whatever shit to the wall that stuck. The same book from the Soviet Union that propagated this idea after his death that he was responsible for all these pogroms in Ukraine. The same book also claimed that he had a personal bodyguard who had sharpened his teeth to look like shark teeth so that he could rip the throat out of people with a bite at Makhno's command.
What the fuck?
Which is a cool image. On its face, absolutely not true. So we can discredit that offhand. The other two are a little harder to kind of discredit. The second one is from White Army generals who were exiled after the the Soviet victory in the Russian Civil War, and a lot of them just didn't like Makhno and wanted to nail him to a wall. And a lot of these guys were themselves extremely anti-Semitic and did a lot of violence against Jews during the war. But they made a point of accusing Makhno of doing it because it made him look bad because they hated him.
Well, of course they hated him.
The third one is a lot more difficult to discredit because it came from a guy who actually personally knew Makhno, and they were old friends during the Civil War, and then had a falling out after the war. And this guy was Jewish, and he claimed that he had personally witnessed Black Army soldiers on Makhno's orders burning down a Jewish village. It's never been corroborated. We're not even sure exactly which village it was he was talking about. And it flies in the face of every other policy that we know for a fact that he instituted within his military force.
So it feels like a bold-faced lie.
it feels like a bold-faced lie, and it feels like it's coming from a guy who's just bitter that he had a falling out with his old friend.
I mean, yeah, it does sound like that.
So, I really need to emphasize this. There is no credible evidence that Makhno was an anti-Semite. There's lots of credible evidence that he shot a lot of pogromists.
And I can get hella behind that.
Yeah, and also, another thing that backs that up, his forces, the anarchist forces, only forces in the entire Russian Civil War that had Jewish units.
Wow.
Yeah. Jewish anarchist insurrectionary units. Like, that's rad as fuck.
Hella rad.
That's cool as shit. I love that. So, anyways, so eventually, this sort of uprising that he's organizing, eventually the occupation forces discovered that he had returned to Ukraine, and they placed a bounty on his head, so he ended up being forced to hide out, to leave Hulyapol and hide out in a nearby town called Ternivka. And it was in Ternivka that, after a little while, he decided that it was time to get this rebellion out in force. And so he revealed himself publicly and organized the peasants of Ternivka into one big blackguard militia, and began conducting open military assaults on Ukrainian nationalists and occupation forces. And pretty soon after that, they would end up winning a pretty big victory against a Austrian rearguard and captured a giant Austrian supply depot. And they got a whole shitload of guns. Like, a crazy amount of guns.
That does not surprise me. Would you say an American amount of guns?
An American amount of guns. And they started handing those things out like candy. And the insurrection just exploded. All of eastern Ukraine, southeastern Ukraine just kind of blew up. Peasant militias just started coming out of the woodwork and shooting any nationalist or any German soldier that they could find.
As they should.
Yeah. Perfectly within their right. So Makhno and his forces were immediate. The reaction was pretty swift. They were immediately attacked by Austrian troops, which forced them to hide out in a little forest called the Debrivka. And so they were hanging out there a little bit, still trying to kind of coordinate these mass uprisings, which were still doing a lot of damage, but there was an Austrian force that was kind of forcing them, like the core of their command structure, into hiding. And eventually the Austrians found them in the Debrivka forest and surrounded them and began trying to assault into the forest and were demanding the anarchist surrender. It was a pretty bad situation for Makhno and his men. So he concocts a plan, which results in the Battle of Debrivka, where basically he's able to identify a weak spot in the Austrian line and basically rolls the dice. He makes a gamble that if he can concentrate enough of his forces in this one spot for enough time, he can convince the Austrians that his force is bigger than it actually is and force them to retreat.
Damn.
And it works.
Damn!
It works. They break out. They break through the Austrian line. The Austrians are convinced that the blackguards have like 10 times more numbers than they actually do, and they fall back and let them go, basically saving the lives of nearly everybody that was there.
Hell yeah!
And so for this, his men end up giving him the nickname Batko, which translates as basically like father or dad.
Hell yeah!
Like, you're our dad now. Keep in mind, this is 1918. He is 30.
Holy shnikes, Batman.
Yeah. So, this victory would end up leading to kind of an ugly back and forth where each side would deal out retaliatory attacks on one another. The occupation forces burned down several villages and killed hundreds of civilians. And in response, anarchists would start attacking who they believed to be local collaborators. A lot of times they were collaborators, sometimes they were just civilians. This is a civil war. It happens.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, mainly the people that they targeted as collaborators were... have you heard of Mennonites?
I think we've discussed it before. Aren't they similar to the Amish?
Yeah, so after the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s in Germany, there were a few different Protestant sects kind of floating around, and one of them was the Mennonites, and they were persecuted and forced to flee from Germany. One part of the Mennonites went west, eventually first settling in the Netherlands, and then eventually England, and then eventually they made their way over to the U.S. or the English colonies in North America, where they would eventually become, the modern Mennonites and also the Pennsylvania Dutch. Another group of them went east and sought the protection of the Tsar and ended up settling in Russia, or in the Russian Empire. They settled in what would eventually become Ukraine. And they had special protections and privileges from the Tsar, and so they were able to get very wealthy, or a lot of them were able to get very wealthy. Not all of them, but they were a noticeably better off demographic in Ukraine than a lot of native Ukrainians were. And so a lot of them were landlords. A lot of them were business owners. A lot of them were the exact people that the Ukrainian anarchists were now expropriating from and fighting against and angry at. And so, that story I told about the young boy that was being beaten up by the farm manager and the farm owner's son.
Yeah.
The guy that owned that farm, landlord, was a Mennonite.
Interesting.
And so a lot of these Ukrainian anarchists just associated all Mennonites with, the landlords, the nobility, the rich peasants, and the bourgeoisie. And so there were a lot of massacres that came out of that. They'd just go into a Mennonite village and massacre them.
That's not necessarily how we should be doing this.
Yeah, that's not good. Just full stop. That's not good. That's bad. That's really bad.
Yeah.
Let's not do that. Let's be better than that. So yeah, that a lot of the biggest massacres against Mennonites kind of happened during this period. But all the while this kind of back and forth is going on, Makhno was traveling from village to village, agitating local peasants to take up arms, just growing his forces bigger and bigger and bigger, and they were becoming the dominant military force in this region. So the uprising had eventually snowballed. Eventually, the occupation forces were forced to pull out of Hulyapol, and Makhno was finally able to return home in November of 1918. Once he got back, he set up the Blackguard's headquarters there, and then once he got the headquarters and the command structure well established, he reorganized the Blackguards into a more formal military unit. So they would still be insurgents, they would still be guerrillas, but he wanted to instill some actual military discipline into them. And keep in mind, this is an anarchist army we're talking about. It's very democratic. I don't know if you've ever kind of looked or kind of learned it, you're familiar with the concept of basically they would elect their own officers. So they would be divided into companies and squads and things, but their commanders were all elected. And they still had to follow their commander's orders, but they could always vote their commander out too. And a lot of whenever they would go on the offensive, or whenever they would go on go do a raid or something like that, it would be decided through a popular discussion of all of the units that would be involved. They would openly discuss this is how we're going to do this. This is the kind of strategy I think we should do, and then they'd have a debate about it. And this is this is the target that I think we should target. They'd have a debate about it, and then they'd eventually have a vote on it and decide whether they would do it or not.
Wow, that's dope.
Yeah, it's really cool. It often made things a little bit slower, naturally, but in certain situations, they still had commanders. They were elected commanders, but they still had commanders. And in times when command was needed, these guys knew how to step in and give orders, and these orders had to be followed. No questions asked. Makhno was not playing with that part of it. He needed that discipline in order to do all of the things that they needed to do in order to survive. Just no questions asked. But outside of that, it was still representative of the anarchist values that they were trying to create. So the soldiers that were involved had a lot of say and a lot of their own voice being heard in how the military was run.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's And that was a really popular concept, like all throughout Europe at the time, because they'd just gotten out of 4 years of the fucking trenches. And so the idea of being able to vote your commander out who sent you over the top, and you watched like half of your platoon get blown apart by machine guns, like that was a very appealing concept for a lot of people. It's a big reason why the Russian Revolution happened in the first place. So he reorganized the Blackguards to be more formal, like a more formal military unit with better military discipline and better organization. And he christened this army the Revolutionary Insurgent Army of Ukraine, or the RIAU. Bit of a mouthful.
Very much of a mouthful.
Yeah, it's better known today as the Black Army.
Okay.
You get it? You get it because you got the Red Army, you got the White Army. These are the anarchists of the Black Army.
I had only heard of the Red Army, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, this is the Russian Revolution. You get the Red Army, the White Army, then now we got the Black Army. They also had these smaller armies called the Green Armies, which one Green Army does come up in this story, but they played some major parts in the Civil War, not important to our story.
Gotcha.
So yeah, he founds the Black Army, and his new army, now firmly established, he begins to draw up war plans to take back Ukraine from reactionaries. Luckily for him, it was a really convenient period. Well, luckily for him, it was kind of a mixed bag. So, it was November of 1918. At the time that he was finally being able to go back to his home, he was kicking the Germans and the Austrians out, and he was able to go back home. The same time that was happening, the Central Powers and the Entente Powers were signing the armistice, and the war was ending. And so, now that the war had ended, the German and Austrian forces didn't have any reason to be there. And so, they fucked off and went back home. And that was the main military force that was propping up the Hetman government. And so, the puppet government ended up being overthrown, and the nationalists took back power. But they were, very weak. And so, when this happened, both the White Armies and the Red Armies converged on Ukraine to eat up as much of the territory as they could possibly get while the getting was good.
So basically, like, not on my watch, bitch.
Makhno was caught right in the middle, and he knew that if he tried to fight off everybody at once, he would lose. That was not a winning battle. And so he did something that he didn't really want to do constitutionally, but he knew it was the best choice tactically and strategically. He made an alliance with the Red Army.
I mean, strategically, yes, but
So he reached out to the Bolsheviks. He formed an alliance with them. And after some fits and starts, Makhno made the just purely practical choice to allow the Black Army to be formally absorbed into the Red Army's command structure. And so the anarchists effectively became a part of the Red Army.
Yikes.
During this time, he was technically subordinate to the Bolsheviks, but he also defied their orders all the time. And so the Black Army was still effectively independent.
Okay.
The only difference now was that he had access to all of the Bolsheviks' resources. So he could get guns from the Red Army that his men needed. He could get food, and he could get, like medical supplies and medical, doctors. There weren't a lot of doctors in rural Ukraine. He kind of needed those.
Yeah.
So one example of like kind of the conflict that was kind of inherent to this partnership. One time, he had a blanket policy that absolutely no commissars were allowed to be attached to his army. So he never let commissars near them, and it frustrated the Reds to no end. The second thing was...
Fuck him.
Yeah, the second thing was what he really wanted to do was whenever he saw a Cheka officer, he just wanted to pull out his pistol. That's what he wanted to do. But he couldn't do that for practical reasons, and so he did the next best thing, and he just arrested any of them that tried to come near his army. So basically saying, like, yeah, they were interfering with my commands. Like, I was trying to give commands, and they were getting in the way.
I mean, that's one way to do it.
And so throughout their alliance, the blacks and the reds would constantly trade jabs and get in each other's ways. Each side's newspapers ran articles denouncing the other one as counter-revolutionary, even while their soldiers were fighting and dying alongside one another on the front lines against the White Army. But despite all that, there were still several high-ranking Bolsheviks who actually supported Makhno. So yeah, there were several high-ranking Bolsheviks that were, they supported Makhno. They liked Makhno. One of them was the commander of the Ukrainian Red Army, Vladimir Antonov Ovsenko, which is a whole mouthful of a name. I can't believe I said that correctly on the first try. The other one was a much higher-ranking guy, Lev Kamenev, who was a member of the Politburo. So he was one of the guys in charge of the Bolshevik Party. And he really liked Makhno. He went down and he hung out in Ukraine for a little bit and just kind of, got the vibes of what the anarchists had going on. He was like, hell yeah, this is pretty neat. It's pretty good. I'm going to put in a good word for you when I get back to Moscow.
What the fuck? My phone went off and I'm on Do Not Disturb mode and it pisses me off. This is the second time during a recording it's done that.
Technology's just dumb. It's dumb. It's stupid.
You're telling me.
So, yeah. Nevertheless, despite some of the institutional support that he had, Makhno continued to publicly rail against the Bolsheviks any chance he got. He hated their authoritarianism. Obviously, he's an anarchist. He's an anarchist. They're a state. They are the enemy. It's as simple as that. And so it kind of kept a target on his head. And this is kind of getting into maybe if he'd just pretended to toe the line just a little bit, what happens next might not have happened. And it might have ended up better for the anarchists. But he didn't, because he was right. And he was right to feel like he was right. Being right isn't always practical.
No, not always.
That's the issue. That's what's wrong with the world, and that's what's especially wrong with a revolution. Being right is not always practical. It's always good, but it's not always practical. So, the war against the White Army in the Donbass region, it did not go well. And the revolutionary line was starting to fall apart. So the Bolsheviks, specifically this guy named Leon Trotsky, who was basically the overall commander of the Red Army. He's the founder of the Red Army. And also, Stalin gave him an ice pick later. But at this point, Trotsky and his sort of sect of Bolsheviks took the opportunity to put the blame for the failures in Ukraine on Makhno and had him declared an outlaw.
Wow.
So the whites, So the whites, they were starting to gain ground. They were pushing deeper into Ukraine. And in June of 1919, Huyapol fell once again. And all of these things kind of happening at once kind of forced the Black Army back underground as an insurgency. All of these things kind of happening at once forced the Black Army back underground as an insurgency. And I want to take a quick detour real quick because I really like this. This is a really funny story. So I just wanted to take a quick, very brief detour to tell this story because this is really funny. Right around this time when the Black Army is being forced back underground, there's this other guy who, he's a Cossack commander named Nikifor Hryhoriev, which is such a pain in the ass to say. So, he was a Cossack commander. He had started out the war as a member, supporting the White Army, and then he switched sides and supported the Nationalists, and then he switched sides and supported the Bolsheviks, and then right now, he's revolting against the Bolsheviks and kind of doing his own thing now. Makhno didn't like him, because he wasn't a socialist, and he wasn't an anarchist, so... but in this moment, he couldn't be picky about who his allies were, and so he tried to reach out and kind of organize an alliance with this guy. And during the discussions, news came out, while they were sitting down having a discussion about an alliance with one another, that this guy Hryhoriev had ordered the destruction of several local Jewish villages. And so when Makhno heard this, he was like, okay, well, this alliance is off. We're going to put you down like a dog now. So Hryhoriev takes offense at this because how dare you point out the thing that I did. And so he begins to reach for his pistol. But before he can get the pistol out of his holster, One of Makhno's guys pulls his pistol faster and puts 3 rounds into his chest.
Hell yeah.
And just puts the guy, hell yes. That's what you get for being an anti-Semitic piece of shit. Fuck you. So yeah, that's a fun story. It turns out, so around this time, when he's going back underground, it turns out Makhno was really well respected by the Red Army troops, like the rank and file. So when he was forced to break with the Red Army, a bunch of Soviet troops just defected and joined the Black Army.
Hell yes.
And when I say a bunch, I mean, it got so bad that one Red Army, actually, I think he was a leader of the Ukrainian bolsheviks, somehow was able to make a phone call to Makhno and over the phone begged him to come back to the Red Army because the Red Army was losing so many troops to desertion that they were falling apart because so many of them were going to join Makhno.
That's awesome.
That's great. That's awesome.
I love that.
Makhno politely declined. So instead, the Red Army just cut their losses and retreated from Ukraine and left the Black Army to their fate. And that was a really bad time because the White Army that they were fighting was the Volunteer Army under this absolute nutcase maniac named Anton Denikin. I won't get too much into Denikin right now. Just know every stereotype you have about like a smug piece of shit anti-Semitic like a Russian nobleman, this guy is that times 10.
Oh fuck, times 10.
Times 10. Utter monster. Just complete bloodless psychopath. Just the things that his army did would make Hitler blush. It is.
Oh shit.
It is insane how efficient they were at murdering civilians and very specifically murdering Jewish civilians. It just bonkers amount of violence coming from this guy. So the anarchists began launching their guerrilla war. They launched several successful attacks behind Denikin's lines, which they were making using their patented hit-and-run cavalry tactics. And it's now that I get to introduce to you one of my favorite doohickeys of all time.
Doohickeys of all time. Do explain.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the concept of a technical?
A what?
A technical. It is a...
It depends on the context.
It is a pickup truck with a machine gun mounted on the back.
I did not know that was a term for that.
Yeah, like, there's an entire conflict between, it was between Libya and, Chad, between Libya and Chad in North Africa. There's an entire conflict that's called the Toyota Wars, because the Chad army made extensive use of Toyota Tacomas with 30 caliber machine guns mounted on the back, and that's how they won the war. So technicals are a thing.
That's something I want to hear about. A Toyota war?
Yeah, the Toyota War. It's pretty great. Yeah, it's one of Muammar Gaddafi's less noble moments. Which, not that he had a lot of moments, but one of his more, like, embarrassing moments. Anyways, Nestor Makhno invented technicals.
Okay.
Except, at the time, pickup trucks weren't a thing. They weren't quite invented yet. So what they had instead was they had a bunch of captured Maxim machine guns that were from the Russian army, which they mounted on the back of horse-drawn carriages.
Wow.
They have one guy piloting, or like driving the coach, and then they'd have one guy in the back, or they'd have two guys in the back, one firing the thing and one feeding the ammunition. And these were insanely effective.
I hope so.
Because they brought a whole huge amount of firepower on a very mobile platform that nobody else in the Russian Civil War was really equipped to cope with. It was very ahead of its time. It was a very modern weapon system, despite the technology being used. And he made the Black Army made great use of it against Denikin's forces. So they were able to kind of keep their forces afloat as a guerrilla army by just capturing weapons and ammunition and food that from the White Army during their raids. But they kept getting pushed back further and further until eventually they ended up getting bottled up in the city of Uman in about 600 kilometers west of Huiapol. And this was as far as they could go. Any further than this, and the army would have fallen apart. So Makhno made the decision to turn his forces around at the town of Peranivka and prepared a last stand. And this is his Gaugamela. This is his Austerlitz. To give you a little spoiler, this is his greatest victory of his entire career.
Hell yeah.
He sent a small detachment forward from the Black Army's own flank. So basically, he had his guys set up in a line. He took a few guys from the left flank and moved them forward to attack the White Army. Once they got the White Army's attention, he pulled them back. The White Army thought that that was the direction that his army was in, and so they followed it. And as they followed it, they drew closer to the main line, who were hidden, and their entire side, their flank, was completely exposed. And so once they got into position, they got locked down by the rifles, and then Makhno himself personally led a cavalry charge over the hill directly into the side of the White Army's forces.
So he fucked they shit up.
He fucked they shit up. It was utter fucking chaos. It turned into a giant just sword and knife fight. People were like stabbing each other in the dirt and the mud. Just beating each other to death with fists and with like rifle butts. Just an absolute nightmare. But the anarchists were in their element. The White Army didn't know what the fuck to do. And so they broke and they ran. In the attack, so Denikin's army had 15,000 troops. 6,000 of them were killed in the attack. 4,000 of them were killed during the retreat. The other 5,000 were taken prisoner.
Oh, good God.
Denikin's army went from being the single, most powerful force in all of Ukraine and was just about to capture the whole thing to non-existent in 24 hours.
24 hours?
24 hours.
God damn.
That is how quickly Makhno turned the tide of this conflict.
That is insane.
What's more is that the Red Army was falling apart in this area of the war. The Red Army didn't have any defenses in this part of the war. They had fallen apart. They had fled Ukraine. If the Black Army had failed, then the way would have been completely wide open for Denikin's army to march north and capture Moscow. And that very well could have ended the Russian Revolution. Nestor Makhno saved the Russian Revolution.
That's insane.
And now that the White Army, now that the Volunteer Army just didn't exist anymore, Eastern Ukraine was now completely open for the anarchists to do whatever they wanted with. There's nobody left to contest it. And so I'm gonna pull up a map real quick that I'm gonna send you. Okay, so this is a modern Ukraine, the borders of modern Ukraine, and the red bits are the areas that were controlled effectively, that were made into a giant federation of anarchist communes.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Wow.
8 million people. A society of 8 million people from this point began to live completely without a state. They were self-organizing. They ran their own economy. Everything was democratic and based on consensus. And they were free. They were just free, dude.
That sounds dope.
For a brief little moment, 8 million people were completely free. That is incredible to think about.
Unfortunately, given history, it did not last, and it fucking sucks.
It did not last. It is this is Makhno's hype.
Kind of figured.
This is the Black Army. They move back into eastern Ukraine, and they go from town to town and organize eastern Ukraine into this giant federation of communes. They begin mass expropriations. They turn the entire economy into the democratic collective effort, and the Black Army is just there, like, overseeing it and protecting it. And there's no Makhno's not a dictator here. Like, he's not even a president. He doesn't. The only power he has is the loyalty of the Black Army. They could get rid of them anytime they wanted. All they'd have to do is vote him out. And he repeatedly told them over and over again, like,
vote me the fuck out.
Vote me the fuck out. Like, if I'm doing a bad job, just vote me out. He didn't control the politics. The central, like, federated, like regional council of, like, all the different communes. He didn't have a position in like, the federation. And they did stuff that he didn't like all the time. And he didn't have any power to stop it. Because that wasn't his business. He wasn't a dictator. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't in charge of these people. He was just leading them. They followed him voluntarily, and he gave direction, he gave guidance the best that he could, but he knew when to step away.
That's a sign of a great leader, knowing when the fuck to step away.
Deep in his heart of hearts, he's one of the most pure anarchistic people that has ever lived, because in his purest heart of hearts, he did not want to be ruled, and he did not want to rule. Just flat out. And with that mentality, he took all of his skills and all of his ideals and put them into practice and made this. Do you see why I like this guy now?
He sounds like a fucking amazing guy.
Yeah. So after basically taking control of all of eastern Ukraine, the Bolsheviks decide, well, can't really, like, treat him like an outlaw at this point. He's a bit too powerful. So they reached out to the Black Army and they wanted to renegotiate an alliance, which Makhno thought would probably be for the best. That was probably the best course of action. But when they arrived for negotiations, the Bolsheviks didn't come to negotiate. The Bolsheviks came to give orders. And that didn't go over very well with Makhno and the other anarchists. He said, basically, the Red Army was like, you will reincorporate into the Red Army. You will be placed under the command of a Red Army commander, and you will be reassigned, you and your army will be reassigned to go fight in Poland. And he was like, hell the fuck no, we're not. We're Ukrainians. This is our land, motherfucker. We won it. You abandoned this land. We saved it. This is ours. You're not gonna dictate what we're going to do with our land. Fuck you, buddy. And so the negotiations naturally broke down, and Makhno was once again declared an outlaw. And then, unlucky break, a typhus epidemic broke out in the Black Army. So typhus broke out in the Black Army, and Makhno himself ended up catching it. It didn't go well for him. So all of a sudden, he was knocked out with a serious illness, and his entire army was severely weakened. And right at the exact moment when the Red Army was invading again, and another White Army was coming along to kind of, test the waters a little bit. This one under another absolute nutcase named Pyotr Wrangel. At one point, Makhno's typhus got so bad that he slipped into a coma for a couple weeks.
Yikes.
Yeah, and he ended up to avoid like Cheka, to avoid the Cheka that was hunting him down. His followers kind of just had to like take his unconscious body and like chart it from town to town, hiding it.
Wow.
Until he woke up.
That's insane.
Yeah. Eventually he would wake up enough to be able to start leading his army again. But by that point, the Black Army had been pushed back so far. Hoyapol had fallen again. And so he woke up, he saw how bad the Reds were beating them, and pretty quickly got all his guys back together and started doing his guerrilla strikes again. And he instituted a bit more aggressive policy for this conflict. Red Army officers and commissars were all to be shot on sight.
Goddamn.
Yeah. Any enlisted member of the Red Army that they captured would be given an option. Either they defect and they join the Black Army, or they would be stripped of their uniform and their equipment, they'd be given a fresh set of clothes, and they'd be sent back home. So, after 9 months of this, the Red Army's invasion stalled because Makhno was a really good guerrilla commander. And so with 9 months of no progress by the Red Army, the Bolsheviks finally reached out again for a ceasefire, trying to reorganize the alliance again, and all of this was fucking all these deaths were just fucking useless. So they had a temporary alliance once again, and with the brief reprieve, Makhno once again, at this point he's really sick, and I forgot to mention a few times, but like he's been sick a couple times. He has had the typhus, he's had recurring tuberculosis. During that big important battle that he won, during the initial cavalry charge that he was leading, he got shot 6 times.
6 fucking times?
Yeah. By the end of the war, he will have been shot, I think, something like 25 times.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Later on in life, when he's on his deathbed, the nurse that's treating him would make a comment that his body is essentially just encased in scar tissue.
It would fucking have to be.
He was a hard motherfucker. And he did not shy away from getting down in the mud and getting into the fights. And it really showed on his body.
I was about to say, it sounded like it.
Yeah, it was rough. So, the Reds and the Blacks, they had a temporary ceasefire again. Makhno kind of steps back because he's kind of recovering from all of these sicknesses, and he still has like a gaping bullet.
Sounds like he needs to take some fucking time to himself.
Yeah, he has a gaping bullet wound on his ankle that won't heal. Yeah, that's kind of gross, isn't it?
Yeah, I was kind of stunned. Just a gaping wound on your heel of all places.
Or, not heel, ankle. But yeah, like...
Still, I was thinking the same area.
Yeah. So, he hands off command of the Black Army to one of his subordinates, and he kind of sticks behind in Hoyapol to kind of coordinate, like, all of the expropriations, all of the reorganizations, trying to build this society, and however he can. The alliance would hold long enough to finally defeat Pyotr Wrongel's army. And this is around late 1920. The Russian Civil War is starting to close out. Wrongel's army is the last big reactionary army left in Russia. And so once the Black Army and the Red Army kind of finish mopping up, there's really no other reason for the Bolsheviks to be allied with the anarchists. And so, in November 1920, members of the Cheka assassinate all of the highest-ranking members of the Black Army.
Goddamn.
All of the highest-ranking commanders, with the exception of Makhno himself. And the Black Army is thrown into disarray, and Makhno is forced into hiding.
That'd be a shitty thing the Bolsheviks did, right?
Yo, yeah, absolutely.
3 sips.
So yeah, the end of the Russian Civil War was the death of the anarchist project in Ukraine. The Red Army invaded. The Black Army was thrown into disarray. It was scattered to the wind. The remnants, right around Nestor Makhno, would put up a stiff resistance, but he was eventually forced to flee Huyapol. I forgot to mention, I really should have mentioned her earlier, but he has a wife by this point.
Yeah, that's something you probably should have mentioned a while ago.
Yeah, I forgot to put it in the script until like closer here to the end. But her name is Helena, and she was really important in this anarchist. And I think I forgot to mention this whole anarchist project. It's referred to as the Ukrainian Free Territory, but it's also very often called the Makhnovchina. It's named after Makhno.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but the Makhnovchina was a lot of women played a very prominent role, and I really need to emphasize that women are everywhere in this story, and I wasn't able to get to pretty 99% of the men either, because this was a very Makhno oriented episode, but Helena was extremely important, and like if what Makhno did with the anarchist military, she did with anarchist politics. She was at the center of all of the at organizing and coordinating all of the workers' councils and all of the regional councils and committees, and was just as in a lot of ways even more influential than Makhno himself. And it's really important that she gets her due, and I really wish I'd spent a little bit more time on it when I was writing the script, but I was occupied with a lot of stuff. But
this sounds like it's got so many working parts it's hard to get into those kind of details.
Yeah. So they flee west, and they realize it is pretty much over. There's no bouncing back from this. They have to escape. So originally they tried to flee to Poland, which was recently independent and did not recognize the Soviet Union. They did not make it to Poland because they were cut off by a detachment of the Red Army, and so they were forced to change direction and move southwest to the border with Romania. And by the skin of their teeth, they're able to make it to Romania, and they get to the border, and they are immediately arrested by Romanian authorities. Back in Ukraine, the Bolsheviks move in, the Red Army moves in, the anarchist communes are all dissolved, and the workers' councils are all integrated into the larger Bolshevik Soviet structure. And anarchism dies in Ukraine. Well, it doesn't die, but the practice, the territory is gone.
Gotcha.
Man, that sucks. It really sucks. For a little bit, the Soviet government demanded that Romania extradite Makhno to the newly formed USSR, the Soviet Union, in order to be tried. But the Romanian government didn't recognize the Soviet Union. So during all of the back and forth, Makhno and his wife were quietly able to flee to Poland. But when they got to Poland, it was not as they weren't expecting it to be friendly, but they ended up immediately being arrested. That's a common thing from this point forward.
Damn.
Everywhere they go, they're just immediately arrested because big famous anarchists don't want to deal with that. So they are arrested and they are put in prison in pre-trial confinement. And while they are in prison, Helena gives birth to their only child, a young daughter they name Elena. And Elena is born in a prison cell in Warsaw. That is a hell of a way to come into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Makhno and his wife would, after a year in pretrial, they're finally put on trial in 1923, and after 5 days of trial and about 20 minutes of jury deliberation, they are acquitted and they are released.
Wow. Released and like decision in 20 minutes for anything takes for like that never happens.
So they settle up for a little bit in the city of Poznan with their newborn daughter, and the two of them desperately tried to secure a visa to Germany without any success. All the while, they are being harassed by Polish police. They are constantly just like trying to arrest them or ticket them or just question them on like any little pretext they can get, just to kind of try to drive them out of the country. All of this is a bit too much for Makhno. Just everything that he's kind of experienced up to this point, and just the helplessness that he's kind of feeling right now. And he attempts suicide in April of 1924.
Honestly, understandable given the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. Here's a weird thing though. I've heard two different versions of this story. Not on like the suicide attempt, but later in his life, after he is exiled from Ukraine, he gets a giant scar on his cheek. Just like, I think it's on his left side, just going from his ear to like the edge of his chin. Just a giant, obvious scar.
Not big, nasty, gnarly scars, what you're saying.
Yeah. And I've heard two different stories about how he got that scar. One of them was from his suicide attempt, which is kind of vague on exactly how he attempted it, but we know that he was hospitalized because of it. That's one story I've heard about the scar. The second story I've heard about the scar is that he was drunk one night and discovered that Helena was cheating on him, and in a rage he started to beat her. And so to defend herself, she grabbed a broken bottle and slashed him across the face.
Either way, gnarly ways to get that scar.
Yeah, we're not really. I guess it is possible he does become a little bit of an alcoholic later in his life, but it's not really clear if this is the time when he becomes an alcoholic or if it's later when he's a little bit closer to his death. But it does kind of feed into. There were a lot of people that tried to, like a lot of his critics later on tried to claim that he was an alcoholic for most of his life, which is likely not true. And this kind of sounds like a story that fit into that. Now I gotta level with you. Feminism was one of his blind spots. That was one of his flaws.
Sounds like it.
He was not good to women. He was not the worst to women. There's not really much evidence that he was ever like physically abusive of a woman in his life. But he didn't always have nice things to say about women. So that is within the realm of possibility. If alcohol and depression were involved, I can see it being possible. But it also sounds a whole lot like a lot of the slurs that were kind of hurled in his direction by his critics later on in his life. So, make of that what you will. So, the Polish government eventually allowed him to settle. There was a technically independent, like, micronation called the Free City of Danzig, which was on the Baltic coast. And it was. It was formerly part of Prussia. It was formerly part of the German Empire, but after Germany lost the war, that part was given to Poland, and the city of Danzig specifically was kept independent. So the Polish government allowed them to move to Danzig, and so they took the opportunity because they thought in Danzig they would have a better chance of being able to move to Berlin. As soon as they arrive in Danzig, they are once again arrested because when a government hears that there's some prominent anarchists who are trying to get into your country, they immediately jump into action. So, while he's imprisoned in Danzig, some anarchists who are sympathetic, who kind of look up to him, some German anarchists, they swing by and they're able to actually break him out. And he's able to flee to Berlin. And Berlin, much more open country at this point. The Weimar Republic had a lot of flaws, but it was a very progressive country for what it's worth. And they kept him under surveillance, but they weren't actively trying to run him out of the country. So he was able to kind of hunker down and hang out in Berlin for a little bit until his wife and daughter could join him there. So he's there for a couple months. They finally get to Berlin, and then all together they all move to Paris, which is where they finally settle down. And that is where Nestor Makhno is going to live the rest of his life.
Until he passes away from tuberculosis, like you mentioned?
For what it's worth, he hated Paris. He despised living in a big city. He was extremely homesick. He was extremely depressed. And he was also painful all the time because of all of the times that he was shot and because of his tuberculosis. He spent the last decade of his life in poverty, working odd jobs to care for his daughter, and spending most of his free time getting into public arguments with other anarchists over theory. And this is around the time when he started getting accusations of anti-Semitism. And so eventually, after years of declining health, he finally died of tuberculosis on July 25th, 1934, at the age of 46.
He died at 46. That's young.
Yeah. He was cremated, and his ashes were interred in the Père-Lachaise cemetery in Paris, which you can go see it. If you're ever in Paris, you can go see his grave. It's got a big mural of him and his name in Ukrainian and his birthday and death day. In 1940, Nazi Germany occupied Paris. Upon discovering who Makhno's widow and daughter were, the two of them were arrested by the Nazis, and they were taken to a concentration camp in Germany where they were subjected to forced labor.
That's fucked up.
They were there for 5 years, the entirety of the war. And then, I still can't believe this happened. Their camp, at the end of the war, their camp was liberated by the Red Army.
Oh my god.
The Red Army discovered who it was that they had, and both of them were immediately arrested.
What the fuck?
Helena was sent to a gulag and was once again subjected to forced labor, and Elena was banished to Kazakhstan. Just a little, basically under house arrest in a shed in the middle of nowhere in Kazakhstan. They would be there from 1946 until 1953. 7 years.
That's some bullshit.
Yeah. They would finally be freed during the process of de-Stalinization and the immediate aftermath of Stalin's death in 1953. They were reunited, and they settled down in the Kazakh city of Taraz. And that's where they lived the rest of their lives. Mostly quiet, mostly a quiet life, except for the occasional harassment by Soviet police.
Sounds like they got harassed left and fucking right.
Yeah, they did not live happy lives. Anarchists are never allowed to live happy lives. It's just... So yeah, that's a real downer.
Fucking telling me, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that fucking sucked. Man, this is probably our most, bipolar episode. It had the highest highs and it had the lowest lows.
Yeah, exactly. What about your sources, Derek?
The main source I used was Nestor Makhno, Anarchy's Cossack by Alexandra Skurda, which is it's the only good comprehensive biography about Nestor Makhno, which is unfortunate because it has a very strong and direct anarchist slant, which, of course, I agree with, but I did want to hear the criticisms and kind of get more into the criticisms, but there's no comprehensive biography of Makhno that's critical of him. This is the only one that exists of him. So that was the main one that I used, and I did my best for, the flip side of it. But yeah, Alexandra Skirta. Tim, where can they find the... Okay, yeah. You can find me on Blue Sky at Visigoth. The O is 0. Tim, give them the good stuff.
So they can find me at Tim, aka Otis, on Blue Sky, and they can find the podcast at Facebook and Instagram at the Alexander Society Pod, Alex Society Pod on Blue Sky, and Alexander Society on TikTok, which we both really need to work on fixing because we have let that one rot on TikTok. If they've enjoyed what they've listened to, they can give us a rate and review on their streaming platform of choice, and we will see them next time.
Bye.